The morning sun cast long shadows across the Texas prairie as Chief Running Bear's war party returned to their village along the Brazos River. The year was 1858, and tensions between the Comanche nation and white settlers had reached a breaking point. What should have been a triumphant return from a raid on a settler's farm had turned into something much darker. Running Bear rode at the front of his warriors, his weathered face showing no emotion despite the turmoil in his heart. Behind him, his son Little Wolf lay draped across his horse, blood seeping through the makeshift bandages wrapped around his chest. The boy was only 16 summers old, but he had insisted on joining the raid to prove himself as a warrior. Now he fought for his life, his breath coming in short, painful gasps. The raid had been planned for weeks. Reports had reached the Comanche camp that a family of settlers had built their homestead on traditional hunting grounds near the Colorado River. Running Bear, as war chief of his band, felt duty-bound to defend their ancestral lands. The plan was simple: take what they needed, burn the structures, and send a message that this territory belonged to the Comanche people. But nothing had gone according to plan. When they arrived at the small farm in the pre-dawn darkness, they discovered it was better defended than expected. The settler, a man named Thomas Harrison, was a former soldier who had fought in the Mexican War. He had prepared for such an attack, positioning his family in a reinforced root cellar, while he and his oldest son took defensive positions. The battle was fierce but brief. Running Bear's warriors overwhelmed the defenders, but not before Harrison managed to fire several shots from his rifle. One of those shots found Little Wolf just as the young warrior was attempting to set fire to the cabin. The heavy lead ball struck him in the chest, spinning him around and dropping him to the ground. As the war party rode through the village gates, women and children gathered to see what the warriors had brought back. Usually, such returns were occasions for celebration, with captured goods distributed among the families and stories of bravery shared around the fires. This time, the mood was somber. Running Bear's wife, Bright Star, rushed to her son's side as the warriors carefully lifted him from the horse. Her face remained composed, as befitted the wife of a war chief, but her eyes betrayed her fear. Little Wolf had always been special to her, the youngest of her 3 sons and the one who most resembled his father in both appearance and temperament. "Take him to the medicine lodge," she instructed the warriors, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Send for Gray Owl immediately." Gray Owl was the band's medicine man, an elderly Comanche who had been healing wounds and ailments for more than 40 winters. He arrived at the lodge within minutes, his leather bag of herbs and instruments in hand. After examining Little Wolf carefully, he shook his head gravely. "The bullet is deep," he told Running Bear and Bright Star. "It missed his heart, but it has damaged something inside. I can try to remove it, but—" He left the sentence unfinished, but everyone understood the implications. As Gray Owl began his work, Little Wolf's cries of pain echoed through the village. The medicine man had given him peyote to dull the agony, but it was not enough. The boy's screams were heartbreaking, a sound that no parent should ever have to hear. Running Bear stood outside the lodge, his fists clenched, feeling more helpless than he had ever felt in his life. Hours passed, and still Little Wolf cried out. Gray Owl worked tirelessly, using heated knives to probe for the bullet while Bright Star and 2 other women held the boy down. The entire village could hear the sounds of suffering coming from the medicine lodge, and many families gathered in small groups, offering prayers to the Great Spirit for Little Wolf's recovery. Among those who heard the cries was a young white woman named Sarah Mitchell. She had been captured during a raid on a wagon train 6 months earlier, taken while traveling west with her family to start a new life in California. Her parents and younger brother had been killed in the attack, and she had been brought back to the village as a slave. Sarah was 19 years old, with auburn hair and green eyes that reminded some of the older Comanche women of the mountain lakes they had known in their youth. She had been assigned to work for Standing Crow, one of Running Bear's cousins, helping with cooking, hide preparation, and other camp duties. Despite her circumstances, she had shown remarkable resilience, learning to speak basic Comanche and adapting to life in the village. Standing Crow's wife, Moon Shadow, had grown fond of Sarah despite the cultural barriers between them. The Comanche woman had lost her own daughter to a fever 2 years earlier, and she found comfort in having a young woman around to help with daily tasks. Sarah, for her part, was grateful for Moon Shadow's relative kindness in a situation where she had little control over her fate. As Little Wolf's cries continued into the afternoon, Sarah found herself thinking about her own younger brother, who had been only 12 when he died in the wagon train attack. She remembered how she used to sing to him when he was frightened or hurt, old songs that their mother had taught them both. The melodies always seemed to calm him, even during thunderstorms or when he was sick with fever. The pain in Little Wolf's voice reminded her so strongly of her brother's suffering that she felt compelled to do something, anything, to help. She knew that as a captive she had no right to interfere in the affairs of the chief's family, but her compassion overwhelmed her caution. Late in the afternoon, as the sun began to sink toward the western horizon, Sarah approached Moon Shadow while they were preparing the evening meal. "The chief's son," she said in halting Comanche, "he suffers greatly." Moon Shadow nodded sadly. "Gray Owl does what he can, but the bullet is stubborn. It hides deep inside the boy's body." "In my people's ways," Sarah continued carefully, "sometimes singing helps with pain. My mother taught me songs that bring peace to the spirit." Moon Shadow looked at her with surprise. It was unusual for a captive to offer anything beyond basic labor, and the idea of a white woman helping the war chief's son seemed almost unthinkable. But she could see the genuine concern in Sarah's eyes, and she remembered her own daughter's love of songs and stories. "You would do this?" Moon Shadow asked. "Even though his father's warriors brought death to your family?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, considering the question. The hatred she felt for her captors was still there, burning in her chest like a live coal. But when she heard Little Wolf's cries, all she could think of was her brother's pain and her desperate wish that she could have done something to ease his suffering before he died. "A child in pain is just a child," she finally answered. "Whatever wrongs exist between our peoples, they are not his wrongs." Moon Shadow studied Sarah's face for a long time, then nodded slowly. "I will speak to Bright Star," she said. "But you must understand. If the boy dies while you are with him, some may blame you. The medicine ways of white people are not trusted here." "I understand," Sarah replied, "but I must try." As evening approached, Moon Shadow made her way to the medicine lodge, where Bright Star kept vigil outside. The two women had known each other for many years, and Moon Shadow chose her words carefully as she explained Sarah's offer. Bright Star listened without interrupting, her face showing no emotion. When Moon Shadow finished speaking, she was quiet for several minutes, considering the unprecedented request. Inside the lodge, Little Wolf's cries had grown weaker, but had not stopped, and Gray Owl emerged periodically to report that he was making little progress. Finally, Bright Star spoke. "Bring the white woman," she said. "If her songs can bring peace to my son's spirit, I care nothing for the color of her skin or the people she comes from. A mother's heart knows no boundaries when her child suffers." And so, as darkness began to fall over the Comanche village, Sarah Mitchell found herself walking toward the medicine lodge, her heart pounding with nervousness and determination. She carried with her the memory of her brother's trust, the weight of her current circumstances, and a small spark of hope that perhaps in this moment the divide between their two worlds might not matter as much as simple human compassion. Behind her, Moon Shadow followed at a respectful distance, while ahead the sounds of Little Wolf's suffering continued to echo through the gathering night. Sarah had no way of knowing whether her songs would help, but she knew she had to try. In a world torn apart by violence and mistrust, sometimes the smallest acts of kindness could bridge the widest gaps. As she approached the lodge where Running Bear stood guard, Sarah realized that this moment would change something fundamental in her relationship with her captors. She was no longer just a slave or a possession to be used for labor. For the first time since her capture, she was about to become a participant in their community, offering something of value from her own culture and background. The war chief looked at her with surprise as she approached, his dark eyes questioning. Behind him, the sounds of his son's agony continued, and Sarah could see the helplessness and desperation written across his weathered features. This proud warrior, who had led countless raids and commanded the respect of his people, was powerless against his child's suffering. In that moment, as she stood before the man whose warriors had destroyed her family, Sarah saw not an enemy, but a father, consumed by worry for his son. The recognition shocked her, but it also strengthened her resolve. Whatever had happened before, whatever might happen after, right now there was only a wounded boy who needed help, and she possessed something that might ease his pain. The next few hours would test not only Sarah's courage and compassion, but also the willingness of an entire Comanche village to accept help from an unexpected source. The songs she was about to sing would do more than soothe Little Wolf's suffering. They would begin to weave new threads in the complex tapestry of relationships between captive and captor, between two cultures that had been taught to see each other as enemies. As Bright Star emerged from the lodge and gestured for Sarah to enter, the young woman took a deep breath and stepped forward into unknown territory, carrying with her the hope that music might succeed where medicine had so far failed. Sarah stepped into the medicine lodge and immediately felt the weight of the sacred space surrounding her. The air was thick with the smoke of burning sage and sweetgrass, and the flickering light from the central fire cast dancing shadows on the hide walls. Gray Owl looked up from his patient with surprise, his weathered hands still holding the heated metal probe he had been using to search for the buried bullet. Little Wolf lay on a bed of buffalo robes, his young face pale and drawn with pain. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool evening air, and his breathing came in short, shallow gasps. His eyes were closed, but his body tensed with each wave of agony that swept through him. The sight reminded Sarah so powerfully of her brother's final hours that she had to steady herself against the lodge pole. Bright Star moved to stand beside her son's head, placing a gentle hand on his fevered brow. "The white woman believes her songs may bring peace to your spirit, my son," she said softly in Comanche. "Will you let her try?" Little Wolf's eyes fluttered open, focusing with difficulty on Sarah's face. He had seen her around the village during his recovery from previous minor injuries, but had never paid much attention to the white captive. Now, through his haze of pain, he studied her features with the intense curiosity of someone whose world had been reduced to the immediate struggle for survival. Sarah knelt beside the bed of robes, her heart racing. She had no idea what she was doing or whether her songs would help, but she knew she had to try. Looking at Little Wolf's face, she saw not the son of her enemy, but simply a boy in terrible pain. She thought of her brother David, of the nights she had sung him to sleep after their father's death, of the comfort that music had always brought to their small family. Slowly, softly, she began to hum a melody her mother had taught her years ago. It was an old Irish lullaby, passed down through generations of Mitchell women, a song that spoke of peace and rest and the protection of those we love. Her voice was tentative at first, barely audible above the crackling of the fire and Little Wolf's labored breathing, but as she continued, her confidence grew. The melody filled the lodge, rising and falling like the wind across the prairie. She sang without words at first, letting the pure sound of her voice carry the emotions she could not express in Comanche. The song spoke of sorrow and hope, of loss and healing, of the universal language of love that transcends all barriers. Something remarkable happened as Sarah's voice grew stronger. Little Wolf's breathing began to slow and deepen. His body, which had been rigid with pain, gradually relaxed into the buffalo robes. His eyes remained fixed on Sarah's face, as if he were drawing strength from her presence as much as from her song. Gray Owl paused in his work, his probe still in his hand. In all his years of healing, he had never seen such an immediate response to any treatment. The boy's pain was clearly still there, but something in the white woman's song was helping him to endure it. The medicine man exchanged a meaningful look with Bright Star, who nodded for him to continue his delicate work. After several minutes, Sarah began to sing the words of the lullaby in English, her voice clear and sweet in the smoky air. "Sleep, my child, and peace attend thee all through the night. Guardian angels God will send thee all through the night. Soft the drowsy hours are creeping, hill and vale in slumber sleeping. I my loving vigil keeping all through the night." Little Wolf did not understand the words, but he understood the emotion behind them. The song spoke of protection and love, of someone watching over a sleeping child. It reminded him of his own mother's voice when he was small, of the stories she would tell him about the great spirits who watched over the Comanche people. As Gray Owl resumed his work, probing carefully for the buried bullet, Little Wolf's cries diminished to soft whimpers. Sarah continued singing, moving from the Irish lullaby to a gentle hymn her mother had favored, then to a simple folk song about birds returning to their nests at evening. She sang for over an hour, her voice never wavering, creating a cocoon of sound that seemed to wrap around the wounded boy like a protective blanket. Outside the lodge, word of what was happening had spread throughout the village. Warriors, women, and children gathered in small groups, listening to the strange but beautiful music coming from within. Many had never heard white music before, and they found themselves drawn to the exotic melodies despite their suspicion of anything associated with their enemies. Running Bear stood just outside the entrance, his arms crossed over his broad chest. As a war chief, he had to maintain his composure in front of his people, but inside, he was struggling with conflicting emotions. The voice coming from the lodge was hauntingly beautiful, and for the first time in hours, his son's cries of agony had stopped. Yet this relief came from one of the very people he had been taught to see as invaders and enemies. Standing Crow joined his cousin outside the lodge, speaking in low tones. "The white woman sings like a meadowlark," he observed. "Moon Shadow told me that she offered to help without being asked." Running Bear nodded slowly. "It is unexpected," he admitted. "I have seen many captives in my lifetime. Most spend their time planning escape or mourning their losses. This one—" He paused, listening to Sarah's voice as it rose and fell. "This one shows courage and compassion that would be honored even among our own people." Inside the lodge, Gray Owl had finally located the bullet. Working with infinite care while Sarah's singing continued to keep Little Wolf calm, the medicine man began the delicate process of extraction. Bright Star held her son's hand, whispering prayers to the spirits, while Sarah maintained her musical vigil. The bullet came free just as Sarah began singing "Amazing Grace," a hymn her family had sung together every Sunday back in their old life in Missouri. Little Wolf's body arched with pain as the metal was removed, but instead of the agonized screams that had filled the lodge for hours, he managed only a sharp intake of breath before Sarah's voice once again seemed to carry him away from his suffering. Gray Owl cleaned the wound and applied a poultice of herbs and clay, his movements sure and practiced despite his advanced age. The immediate danger was past, but the boy would need careful nursing over the coming days to prevent infection and ensure proper healing. As the medicine man finished his work, Sarah's voice began to fade. She had been singing for nearly 3 hours, and her throat was becoming hoarse. Little Wolf had fallen into what appeared to be a natural sleep, his breathing deep and regular for the first time since the injury occurred. Bright Star looked at Sarah with something approaching wonder. "How did you learn such powerful medicine?" she asked in careful English, revealing that she understood far more of the white language than she had previously shown. Sarah was surprised to hear English from the war chief's wife, but she answered honestly. "My mother taught me these songs when I was small. She said music was a gift from God that could heal hearts and bring peace to troubled spirits. I never really understood what she meant until—" She paused, thinking of her brother's death. "Until I needed that peace myself." Gray Owl packed his instruments and herbs, nodding respectfully to Sarah before he left. "The bullet is out and the wound is clean," he told Bright Star. "But the boy will need constant care for many days. The white woman's songs seem to bring him comfort. Perhaps—" He hesitated, then continued. "Perhaps she should stay close in case the pain returns." This was an extraordinary suggestion. Captives were typically kept under close supervision and were never allowed near important tribal members without a guard. But Little Wolf's dramatic improvement while Sarah sang had impressed even the skeptical medicine man. Bright Star considered the proposal for several minutes, watching her sleeping son's peaceful face. Finally, she nodded. She will stay, she decided. But there must be guards nearby, and she must be watched carefully. As word of this decision spread through the village, it created considerable debate among the Comanche families. Some argued that allowing a white captive such access to the war chief's family was dangerous and went against all traditional protocols. Others pointed out that Little Wolf had suffered terribly until the woman began singing, and that her actions showed a spirit of compassion that transcended tribal boundaries. Old Deer Woman, one of the most respected elders in the village, spoke for many when she told her grandson, "The spirits work in mysterious ways, child. Perhaps they sent this woman to us for a purpose we do not yet understand. The song she sang tonight carried power that even our medicine man recognized." As the night deepened, Sarah remained in the lodge, sitting quietly beside Little Wolf's bed. Bright Star had provided her with a blanket and permission to sleep nearby, ready to sing again if the boy's pain returned. 2 young warriors stood guard outside, their presence a reminder of Sarah's status as a captive, but also an indication of her new importance to the community. For Sarah, the evening had been transformative in ways she was only beginning to understand. When she first began singing, it had been purely an act of compassion, driven by memories of her brother's suffering. But as the hours passed and she saw the effect her music had on Little Wolf, she began to realize that she possessed something of genuine value to these people. For the first time since her capture, she felt something other than despair or resigned acceptance. She felt useful, needed, important, in a way that went beyond her ability to cook meals or tan hides. Her songs had accomplished what the tribe's most skilled medicine man could not. They had given Little Wolf the strength to endure his healing. As she settled down to sleep beside the boy's bed, Sarah found herself thinking about her future with new possibilities. She was still a captive, still mourning her family, still hoping for eventual freedom. But tonight had shown her that even in the darkest circumstances, there were ways to find meaning and purpose. Little Wolf stirred in his sleep, making a small sound of distress. Without hesitation, Sarah began to hum softly, a gentle melody that seemed to flow naturally from her heart. The boy's breathing steadied immediately, and he sank back into peaceful sleep. Outside the lodge, Running Bear heard the quiet humming and felt a strange sense of peace settle over him. His son would recover, of this he was now certain, and perhaps in time he would come to understand why the spirits had brought this particular white woman into their lives at this particular moment. The fire in the lodge burned low, casting a warm glow over the sleeping boy and the young woman who had appointed herself his guardian. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and questions about Sarah's role in the village, but for now there was only the quiet rhythm of breathing and the soft echo of lullabies that had traveled far from their origins to bring comfort to an unlikely recipient. In the space of one evening, Sarah Mitchell had transformed from merely a captive slave into something unprecedented, a bridge between two worlds, a source of healing that crossed all cultural boundaries. The songs that had once comforted her own family now served to bind her fate to that of her former enemies in ways that none of them yet fully comprehended. Dawn broke over the Comanche village with the soft colors of rose and gold painting the eastern sky. Sarah woke to find Little Wolf watching her with alert, pain-free eyes for the first time since his injury. His fever had broken during the night, and though he was still weak, the immediate danger had clearly passed. "You stayed," he said in halting English, surprising Sarah with both his use of her language and the fact that he was speaking at all. "I promised your mother I would sing if the pain returned," Sarah replied softly, sitting up and stretching her cramped muscles. "How do you feel?" Little Wolf considered the question carefully. "Like a horse kicked me," he admitted with a weak smile. "But the fire inside my chest is gone. Your songs—" He paused, searching for words in his limited English. "They carried the pain away on the wind." Bright Star entered the lodge carrying a bowl of broth and fresh bandages. She had been up most of the night, checking on her son and marveling at the peaceful sleep that had replaced his previous agonized restlessness. When she saw him awake and alert, tears of relief filled her eyes. "The spirits have smiled upon us," she said, kneeling beside his bed. "Gray Owl says the wound is healing cleanly, with no sign of the poison that kills so many warriors." Over the following days, Sarah found herself in an unprecedented position within the village. She was no longer assigned to regular camp duties, instead spending her time helping to care for Little Wolf and gradually taking on other responsibilities related to healing and comfort. Word of her success with the war chief's son had spread, and other families began to request her services for their own sick or injured members. An elderly woman named Crow Feather, who suffered from painful joints, asked Sarah to sing for her during the long winter nights. A young mother whose baby cried constantly with colic discovered that Sarah's lullabies could soothe the infant when nothing else worked. Even some of the warriors, initially skeptical of accepting help from a white woman, began to appreciate the calming effect of her music during their own healing from battle wounds. Sarah's new role brought both privileges and challenges. She was given better clothing, including a beautiful doe-skin dress decorated with beadwork that Moonshadow had crafted specially for her. Her diet improved significantly, and she was allowed to move more freely around the village. But with these improvements came increased scrutiny and higher expectations. Some villagers remained suspicious of her motivations, wondering if her helpfulness was a deception designed to lull them into carelessness before an escape attempt. Little Wolf's recovery progressed remarkably well. Within a week, he was sitting up and eating solid food. Within 2 weeks, he was walking carefully around the village, always with Sarah nearby in case he needed support or if his pain increased. The boy and the young woman developed an unlikely friendship that fascinated and concerned the adults who observed them. "She is teaching him English words," Running Bear observed to his wife one evening as they watched Sarah and Little Wolf sitting by the river, sharing stories and practicing language skills. "And he is teaching her about our ways," Bright Star replied. "Yesterday I saw her helping the other women prepare pemmican, and her technique was better than many girls who have been raised in our tribe." This cultural exchange worried some of the tribal elders who feared that too much contact with white customs might corrupt their young people. but others saw it as an opportunity to better understand their enemies, believing that knowledge of white ways could be valuable in future conflicts. The situation became more complex when a trading party arrived from another Comanche band, led by a chief named Iron Horse. Among the visitors was a white man named Jacob Fletcher, a former captive who had been adopted into the tribe 15 years earlier and had risen to become a respected warrior and translator. Fletcher was fascinated by Sarah's story and sought her out for long conversations about their shared experiences. "I remember the early days," he told her, as they sat outside the lodge where Little Wolf continued his recovery. "The longing for home, the feeling that you'll never belong anywhere again. But it does get easier." "Do you ever regret staying?" Sarah asked. She had learned that Fletcher had been given multiple opportunities to return to white society, but had chosen to remain with the Comanche. "Sometimes," Fletcher admitted. "But this is my home now. These are my people. I have a wife here, children who know no other life. The man I was before capture died long ago. The man I am now was born in this place." His words forced Sarah to confront questions about her own future that she had been avoiding. As her status in the village improved and her relationships with the Comanche people deepened, the prospect of eventual rescue or escape seemed less appealing than it once had. She was no longer just surviving her captivity, she was building a life within it. The turning point came during the autumn buffalo hunt. Little Wolf, still recovering but determined to prove his courage, insisted on joining the expedition despite his parents' concerns. Sarah, fearing for his health, asked permission to accompany the hunting party as well. This request was unprecedented. Captives were never allowed on important tribal expeditions. Running Bear was initially adamant in his refusal. "The hunt is sacred work," he explained to Sarah through Fletcher's translation. "Only members of the tribe participate in this ancient ritual." But Little Wolf intervened with surprising force. "She is not just a captive anymore," he argued to his father in Comanche. "She has proved her loyalty and her value to our people. Her songs have healed me and others. Should we not honor that service?" The debate that followed divided the village. Progressive voices, led by Bright Star and some of the younger warriors, argued that Sarah had earned the right to be treated as a member of the community. Conservative voices, represented by some of the older men, insisted that racial and cultural boundaries should never be compromised, regardless of individual circumstances. The resolution came from an unexpected source. Old Deer Woman, whose grandson had been among Sarah's patients, stood before the tribal council and spoke with the authority of her age and wisdom. "I have lived through many changes," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the council lodge. "I have seen white soldiers and settlers come in ever-growing numbers. I have watched our young men die fighting wars that seem to have no end. Perhaps it is time to consider that the Spirit sent this white woman to us not as an enemy, but as a teacher." She paused, looking around at the assembled faces. "Her songs have brought healing to our sick. Her presence has shown our children that not all whites are without honor or compassion. If we are to survive in this changing world, we must learn to find allies wherever the spirits provide them." The council voted to allow Sarah to accompany the hunting party, but with strict conditions. She would be closely supervised, assigned specific non-hunting duties, and would be held responsible for any disruption to the sacred rituals of the hunt. The buffalo hunt proved to be another transformative experience for Sarah. She witnessed the incredible skill and bravery of the Comanche hunters, saw the careful rituals of Thanksgiving that accompanied each kill, and participated in the communal work of processing the massive animals that would sustain the village through the winter months. More importantly, she proved herself capable of the demanding physical work that the hunt required. She helped set up and break camp, prepared meals for dozens of people, and worked tirelessly to process hides and meat. Her willingness to tackle any task without complaint earned respect even from some of her harshest critics. On the final night of the hunt, as the successful hunting party prepared for their return to the village, Running Bear approached Sarah as she sat by the fire, mending a torn buffalo hide. "You have shown great strength and dedication," he said in careful English, having learned some of her language from his son. "When we return to the village, there will be a ceremony." Sarah looked up from her work, uncertain about his meaning. "What kind of ceremony?" "An adoption ceremony," Running Bear explained. "If you choose to accept it, you will become a true member of our tribe, no longer a captive, but a daughter of the Comanche people." The offer stunned Sarah. Adoption into Native American tribes was rare and represented complete acceptance into the community. It would mean giving up any hope of returning to white society, but it would also mean safety, belonging, and a genuine place in the world. I need time to think about this," she said quietly. "Of course," Running Bear nodded. "It is not a decision to make lightly. But know this, you have already proven yourself worthy in the eyes of many. Your actions have spoken louder than the color of your skin." That night, as Sarah lay in her robes beneath the vast Texas sky, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. 6 months earlier, she had been a terrified captive mourning the loss of her family and dreaming only of escape. Now she was being offered something she had never imagined: a new family, a new identity, a new home. When she considered her options, she realized that the choice was not as difficult as it should have been. The white world she had come from held nothing for her now. Her family was dead, her previous life destroyed. Here, among the Comanche, she had found purpose and meaning. She had used her gifts to bring comfort and healing to others. She had formed bonds that transcended the artificial boundaries of race and culture. The next morning, she sought out Little Wolf, who was preparing his horse for the return journey. The young warrior had grown stronger during the hunt, both physically and in terms of his standing among the other men. His recovery and his friendship with Sarah had become symbols of hope and positive change within the tribe. "Your father has offered to adopt me into the tribe," Sarah told him as they walked their horses side by side. Little Wolf smiled, but his expression was serious. "It is a great honor," he said, "but also a great responsibility. You would be expected to put the welfare of the Comanche people above all else, even above the interests of your birth people." "I understand," Sarah replied, "and I think I'm ready for that." When the hunting party returned to the village, word of Running Bear's offer had already spread through the community. The adoption ceremony was scheduled for the next new moon, giving Sarah time to prepare and giving any objectors time to voice their concerns. The ceremony itself was unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. Dressed in elaborately decorated clothing provided by Bright Star, she was formally presented to the assembled tribe as Windsong, a name chosen to honor her musical gifts. The ritual involved symbolic acts of death and rebirth, representing the end of her old identity and the beginning of her new life as a Comanche woman. Bright Star spoke for the family. "Today we welcome a new daughter into our lodge. She has proven her courage, her compassion, and her loyalty. She is no longer a stranger among us, but one of our own." Gray Owl blessed her with sacred herbs and prayers, while the assembled villagers chanted ancient songs of acceptance and transformation. Little Wolf, still pale but standing proudly beside his parents, placed an eagle feather in her hair, a symbol of honor that she had earned through her service to the community. As the ceremony concluded and the celebration feast began, Sarah, now Windsong, reflected on the remarkable turn her life had taken. She would always carry the memory of her original family and the sorrow of their loss. But she had learned that identity and belonging could be created as well as inherited, that families could be formed through choice and commitment, as much as through blood. Looking around at the faces of her new people, she saw acceptance, respect, and genuine affection. Little Wolf caught her eye and smiled, the same boy whose cries of pain had first called her to action, but now recovered and strong. In that moment, she knew she had made the right choice. The songs that had once comforted her dying brother now served a new purpose, binding her to a new family and a new future. She had found her place in the world, not where she had expected to find it, but where the spirits had led her through the most unlikely of paths. As the celebration continued late into the night, Windsong stood with her adopted family under the Texas stars. No longer a captive, but a true daughter of the Comanche nation, her voice joining with others in songs of joy and belonging that echoed across the endless prairie.